Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about who killed little Gregory Villemin. Gregory Villemin was a small 4-year-old French school child, and the l'affaire Gregory, or the killing of Gregory Villemin, is kind of like the JonBenet Ramsey case, but in France. 35 years ago, little Gregory Villemin, that's Villemin, was simply playing outside his home on a pile of builders' pebbles and sand, and then he went missing. And this case has so many twists and turns and fascinating details, and it's still unsolved, and it's just got enough to make the viewer, or maybe the participant, or maybe the person who's looking at the file, think that they can be the one to solve the case. If they just had a good look at it and just the one little next interview, a bit of evidence that this is a solvable case, and it's quite frustrating. So if you're going to watch the next bit of this video and you haven't watched Who Killed Little Gregory and you don't want to be spoiled, stop it now. Some people might not enjoy it if it's because it does have subtitles, though it does have a good amount of English, spoken English. It does have a bit of subtitles, which I absolutely love. Some people don't. It is so exasperating and intriguing and annoying, and it's like an itch you can't scratch. This case has got me. That's why I'm doing this video, because I want to know who else out there has watched this series and then went snooping into this case to try to figure out who killed little Gregory. That's what I'm here to talk about today. I'm here to spoil it. So if there's anything that you don't want to be spoiled, now's the time to stop. So without further ado, let's get into it. On October 16th, 1984, in the Opensea-sur-Vologne, that means like the Lepange over the Vologne, which was a river, in France, the little boy, 4 years old, was just simply outside of his house. The house was in kind of a rural area, playing. Then he's gone. The Lepange is a little triangle-shaped valley that's in the Vosges area of France. And it's just a blue collar, was then in 1984, a very blue collar area. Most people there worked in factories, and it was just a sleepy little, I guess you'd call it a town or village, with a population of 1,000 souls. Beginning in 1981, Albert and Monique Villemin, that's Gregory's grandparents, they began to get threatening letters and phone calls from this identity they began to call the Raven. Really crank letters and phone calls that then extended to other people in the Villemin clan. It wasn't just the grandparents. So it starts off 3 years before, 1981. And it would say just nasty things. It would say like, so-and-so, they're gonna die, or they're dying right now. Go call on them. They're dying in their house. And then they would arrive at the person's house, and there would be nothing wrong with that person. It was really weird. They would call them whores and bastards, and they would try to set like people against each other. So if they knew one fact that somebody had said something to someone at the party the week before, then they'd say, yeah, so-and-so said this, and it would stir everybody all up against each other. For example, in 1983, the Raven called a nurse outside the family, not a family member. The Raven told the nurse that Albert Villemin was dying. So this is Grandpa Villemin, and that he needed somebody to take care of him right away. And then when the authorities arrived and like knocked on the door, the guy had just been sleeping. There was absolutely nothing going on. So they like to stir up people, get them all upset, and then say like, oh, you really wanted him to die, send another letter, he was dying, you really wanted him to die. All this like crazy stuff. But stuff that had kernels of truth, and they knew it was a family member, because some of the stuff was stuff only the family would know. The Raven even went as far as threatening the life of one of the family members' children, and that was little Gregory. Jean-Marie is the father of little Gregory, and he had received a phone call from the Raven, and whenever the Raven would call somebody outside the family, it seemed to be that the people would report that it was a woman's voice. But when the Raven would call somebody within the family, they seemed to report that this creepy voice was kind of like a man's voice. It was very odd. And so eventually the phones were being tapped. because this was actually before the murder of little Gregory, an incident to where there was a problem. And the police were tapping the phones of different people. And I'm not even sure if they were aware their phones are being tapped. That's another thing to find out. So we do have audio evidence of the Raven's creepy voice. Ugh, what a monster. Calling different members of the family and saying different things to them. And apparently the Raven had called Jean Marie and told him, threatened him, and he blew it off, and threatened to ruin his, destroy his house. He's like, I'll just build another one. And they threatened to rape his wife, and he didn't react. But then when they said something about, I can see your son, watch out where he plays, then Jean Marie got ticked off, and the Raven knew that he got Jean Marie's goat, and then actually Gregory ends up murdered. So it's hard to tell even initially who the main target of the Raven was, but it became increasingly obvious that Jean Marie, the father, was the target, and that maybe Gregory was just the pawn to hurt Jean Marie. But there actually was a case open against this anonymous crank person way before the murder of little Gregory. By May of 1983, the Raven just kind of went silent. She wasn't sending out crank calls, wasn't writing letters. Maybe they thought that they knew they were being watched and tapped. Who knows why? But everything seemed to be good in the little village of La Ponche. Well, that's until 2 days before little Gregory's murder. Jean Marie, the father of Gregory, and his wife Christine, who's married into the family, have over for dinner his older brother Michel and his wife. They have dinner, and allegedly Jean Marie is showing off his new house, and they were adding on to it. And that's another reason why there was the builder's sand with the pebbles and stuff that Gregory was playing in allegedly when he was kidnapped. So Jean Marie's showing off his splendid new house, and he's got 2 cars, and he's got a leather sofa. They keep making a big deal about the leather sofa. So we're talking about blue-collar workers, blue-collar existences, and then apparently Jean Marie had become the foreman, so it was like a step above, and everybody began calling him the chief or le chef or whatever, and so it's essentially the boss. So he was now being called the boss, and I think it caused a lot of friction in this family. Basically, whenever the brother sat down on the leather couch, he's like, oh, this is, what a boss would have. And it's strange because that kind of terminology is exactly what the Raven was using and used in the letters regarding little Gregory's murder. So it makes you wonder, what, did everyone just go around calling him the boss off work? But to be kind of looking around and be like, yeah, this is a kind of sofa that, a boss would have. And then have that same kind of language used would make you a little bit suspicious. I don't know if something happened at that dinner that really sat wrong, but there's really nothing else went on before Gregory went missing. So that's one little fact. Don't know if it matters at all. Could have been just a normal dinner and has nothing to do with anything having to do with the case, but there you go. The day in question, the little Gregory goes missing. Here are the players. This is going to get exciting. Little Gregory, he is 4 years old. Christina's mom's picked him up from daycare, allegedly. His nanny. And she works too. She has a blue-collar job. She goes and she's letting him play outside. They live in a rural area, so the house is not near other houses, and it has the trees cut down. So you can kind of see what's going on, and she's inside ironing clothes for about 15 minutes, allegedly, and little Gregory's out playing, and then she comes out and he's gone. And that's where we start the story off. People would say, oh, today, why in the world would you let a kid, play outside by himself? Well, it was the 80s. And even in suburbia, I was allowed to go out and play until, when the street lights came on. So there wasn't this concern about kids being kidnapped just off the streets, or especially right 10 feet off your front door. It wasn't that crazy as it is today, and Christine was just inside doing her chores. Christine then testified that when she couldn't find Gregory, that she went to the nanny. She drove the car to the nanny's to see that if he was there for whatever reason. And then she assumed that maybe he went to the village, and so she drove he had a little friend that lived in the village, so she drove to the village, and they said, nope, he's not here. And then she called her husband, Jean-Marie, and said, oh my God, Gregory's missing. Gregory was reported missing by his mother, Christine. And allegedly, the Raven, about this same time, contacts Michel Villemin, the older brother of Jean-Marie, the uncle of Gregory, and says the following. I'm going to read it. I've had my revenge against the chief, the boss, and I've kidnapped his son. I strangled him and threw him in the Villemin. His mother is looking for him but will never find him. My vengeance is complete, paraphrased. Then, so Michel gets this. Mind you, in the past, somebody has said, oh, Grandpa was dead, that the Raven had said that, and it was a false alarm. So I don't know if maybe that any of that factored into what allegedly happened. But Michel then, I guess, tells his mother, because Christine finds out this information from the mother-in-law. So there's a lot of like people saying, oh, the Raven called, the Raven said this, or the Raven called, the Raven said this. It's like crazy. The Raven did not call Christine, or maybe he tried. And maybe she didn't pick up the phone because she was driving all around the village looking for little Gregory. That fact I don't know. All I know is this. Christine reports him missing. Jean-Marie's notified that he's missing. And then the older brother, Michel, all of a sudden knows he's missing because the Raven allegedly calls him. And so then he must have told his mother-in-law, his grandmother, the grandmother. So she must have known to tell Christine the Raven called. So this is just a whole hot mess, and that's probably the way the Raven liked it. 3 hours later, the police find little Gregory's body in the Villemin. Now, I've just told you that the Raven has called different family members and said, you know, I've thrown him in the Villemin. But for whatever reason, either Christine and the initial folks didn't get that message because they say that they were searching the woods. Like apparently near the house, there's like a big woods around the town, and they were all searching the woods. And then at some point, the police got the wind of the fact that there had been a call from the Raven and that the Villemin was specified. So then the police are searching the Villemin, and sure enough, they find the body of little Gregory in the water, which is horrible, okay? But it makes you wonder how messed up this whole thing is. I think one of the best pieces of evidence, and I hate to call a poor child's body evidence, but it is this body. You could sit here and almost figure this darn thing out from the body alone, because even looking at the old black and whites of them picking him out of the Villemin, and it's kind of like a steady stream, okay? And at certain parts of the river as it went along from like where the house is and where he was found, there are even like little parts that has like a little stream in it and goes down like a little mini waterfall. And there's rocks and stuff, and there's twigs, and God, there's probably beavers building dams and stuff. So I want you to understand that it's not just some peaceful little babbling brook. It has its parts that would tear up the clothes of a child. You know, that body would not be in pristine condition as it was found. That body looked like he had just been laid in there like a bathtub. His clothes weren't torn. He had like winter clothing on, and he almost was like tied up almost like a little sacrifice. His little feet were crossed, his little arms were crossed, and perfectly the rope was put around his little feet and his little arms, and then I guess they pulled the little cap down around his neck so he couldn't see, and then put it around his head. Okay, so this is how the body was found, but not even like where he'd struggled or anything, just still, almost like you would set up a corpse. Have you seen them in the mortuary, you know, where they're all peaceful and calm? That body looked really calm, which is weird, because you're gonna take a little a little kid, you know, you can't even get them to put their pants on without a fight. I mean, this kid is not, a normal kid is not going to just let you tie them up and not at least muss the socks up under the pants. You know, there was something funky about the scene. So they pull the body out, and it's just looking still, and everybody comments on how his face is just so calm. Because, hello, when you die in gruesome situations, sometimes your face freezes in this horrible expression, and they said he looks so calm. Weird. So then the autopsy report, and I don't even know if there's an autopsy. It's not like here in my state, you get if there's a crime and you've actually ever put somebody on trial, we have laws that we can get like access to almost all the data that's been put into the criminal trial. And there were many criminal trials in this case, but it's not like that there. So I don't even know if it was just a brief medical exam or if it was a full-on autopsy. All I know, and I think it was an autopsy, but they did find water in his lungs, which led them to believe that he drowned. That's how he died. He drowned. But they were just going, well, he didn't struggle at all. Well, maybe it's because he had the ropes, but there's not even any kind of friction or anything. It just made no sense. But he died by drowning. That he had water in his lungs, that's how he died. I didn't see this note mentioned in the documentary, but I want to say that after reading so many things on serial killers and true crime books and reading things from the FBI, and they always say that if a killer covers the face of their victim, more than likely they knew the victim. That it's a statistical average that more than likely it's someone the victim knew and they knew the victim, or they felt some kind of guilt for what they did. They don't want to look into the face of the person they're killing. And in this case, obviously, the ski cap was pulled down, and the rope went around his neck, and he was thrown into the water. So that person who did that, the suspect didn't want to see the child's face. You got to think, okay, that's someone who knew the kid. It wasn't some stranger that, came rambling into the little sleepy village that just snatched a kid. No, This is just too much information. I'm not even going to indulge anything that it wasn't a family member. It's just not. It was within the family. The police were right. Nobody in this case, I'm talking none of the attorneys, none of the family members, nobody in the town, none of the media, nobody thinks that somebody other than a family member did this, because all the signs point to family member. Okay, I got to get that off my chest. It's just annoying that the family would do this to one of their own, or to anybody, but especially one of their own. It's just, how did this happen? At the approximate time that Gregory was killed, so around the same time period, an anonymous letter, the Raven's letter, was sent from the main post office box. It's a PTT postal drop box, like literally an old school type. You open the lid, shove the letter in. It's built into the village post office. The Raven drops his final missive on this case and hopes that the father will die of sorrow for his vengeance, that he's killed little Gregory, and he hopes Jean-Marie will die of sorrow. And here begins the similarities to the JonBenet Ramsey case. It pretty much starts now. Yes, you have a child died, foul play, child tied up, suspicious circumstances, suspicion of family. But here where you get the journos, the journalists, and the photographers arrive in this they arrive in La Pange like locusts, and they just inundate this little town of 1,000 people. In the documentary, we've got 50-year-old, at that time, not now, Jean Ker. He was a photographer for Paris Match, and he speeds to the town. He's got his trusty, probably Nikon camera, and he has his ever-present tape recorder that he uses. And bless his heart, I feel two ways about Jean Ker. While I believe Jean Ker did a fair amount of unethical shit stirring in the little town, I do also believe that he managed to capture with his recorder a good deal of information that would have been lost to time. Witnesses who would have changed their stories and now can't because it's sitting there on tape. Probably like mini confessions here and there that he captured, and hats off to you for that, Jean Ker. If you ever see this, I doubt you ever will. I do appreciate your hidden microphone capturing some of the stuff that is now part of this case. In this closed-mouth, clannish town, Jean Ker, with his charisma, was able to, and being with Paris Match, he was able to get a lot of people to talk to him and to get them on camera and to get pictures. And a lot of, I'd say a nice chunk of the case file is thanks to Jean Ker. So watching the Netflix documentary, there are going to be some people that you like, and I do enjoy Etienne Seismat. I'll spell that out on the video for you. He was the police gendarme. I'm not sure if he was in charge. I think he might have been. I'm sympathetic to him. I think for a local gendarme, it's not quite, I guess it's the police, but you know, they weren't, it's not like your regular police. They didn't have the capabilities or the capacity that we have today. So I mean, I think at that time that they did what they could, and I don't fault Etienne really in his handling of this case. I think he did the best he could, being for, you know, the resources he had at that time. I do believe when the father, Jean-Marie, was asked by Etienne or one of his colleagues who Jean-Marie thought had kidnapped little Gregory, that the father pretty much had it, in my opinion, right away. He said, I think Laroche, Jacob, and Villemin. He named 3 sections of his family in this crime. And I think initially they might have even considered the fact that it was not just the work of one person, that more than one person was involved in this murder, or at least involved in the murder and the cover-up. So Seismat did the best he could do with what he had to work with in this clannish, and yeah, they said they wasn't a clan, but it was a clanny little closed-mouthed town. So I have mentioned that Jean-Marie's brother, Michel, and his wife, Jeanette, had been at the Villemin house 2 nights before Gregory's murder. And that Michel had been making that comment while sitting on the leather couch about Jean-Marie being a boss, you know. The documentary mentions how Jean-Marie is an extrovert and Michel was an introvert. And they bring up how Michel maybe was a little bit special himself. So I guess that maybe caused some jealousy. I mean, who's to say? You have one son in the family that it's a blue collar town. They both work in blue collar jobs at best, and then he rises above, and instead of being happy and supporting your family member, being proud of them, some people got jealous. They got petty and they got jealous. So they also mentioned that you've got Jean-Marie with Christine, and she's a beautiful woman, especially when you try to think back to the being 1984. I mean, I think she's a gorgeous woman. And then you've got the brother with his wife, Jeanette, I don't know, maybe not as pretty as Christine. And then the son, that, you know, you got one son that's just the cutest little thing in the whole wide world. All the pictures of little Gregory, by the way, which I haven't brought up. That's another thing. Is like JonBenet Ramsey was just a beautiful child. Just looking at her, she's beautiful. And Gregory was just the cutest little thing. You know, had little curly brown hair and this humongous smile. And it seemed like in every picture I just caught this humongous smile and like chocolate brown eyes, and just an adorable little kid. And so I wrote down a list of some of the things that make this case fascinating, and also things that are like the JonBenet Ramsey case, because it just is very strangely similar. You've got a cute child, you got harassing letter or a long letter that needs to be totally broken down and graphology and, you know, just figured out. You got a weird raven voiced, I didn't bring up the phone calls. This is like creepy voice. That is so weird. You got clannish family drama. The concept of the raven as a monster. So that always is appealing. You've got just plain old sensationalism from the media. The involvement of journalists getting into the story, becoming a part of the story, just like JonBenet Ramsey case. Got conflict with the local police versus the national police, and that goes crazy, which I haven't gotten to, and the other police agencies, same as the JonBenet Ramsey case. And everyone, me included, seeming to think that he or she could just solve the crime if they just had that one more piece of evidence. I mean, or you think you've solved the crime, okay? So this has that element of it where it's annoying. it's annoying that this case has not been solved, frankly. And I want to ask the people that are watching right now, when you have watched this whole series, do you think this is something like where it started as a crank between people knowing that they were doing it? Because there's so much evidence that more than one person was the Raven. Do you think this started as a crank and then like someone got a bug and took it too far, and that's probably why like the others didn't want to admit to their complicity because then they thought they'd be complicit for murder? Or do you think that two people full on knew that Gregory was going to be killed and were willing to go that far? Or do you think that just the other part of the Raven was just supporting niggling people? I don't know, but I'm curious to know what you think. But there was a famous French movie called Le Corbeau, which means the raven or the crow. And in this famous movie, you've got a scorned woman that's pestering the whole entire town with these letters. These crank anonymous letters that she sends out to her rivals, and it stirs the whole entire town up, and it pits people against each other. And in some scenes they have this graphology test, and everybody has to write what the Raven had wrote so they could compare it to their own handwriting, try to figure out who the Raven was. And the Raven was a woman in that movie. And so that is how the moniker or the nickname the Crow or the Raven or Le Corbeau became tied to this crank. Everybody calls it the Raven. So that's where it came from, the famous French movie. What's crazy is in order to try to rule out who could have done it, and everybody agreed it had to be a family member, we're talking between 70 and 80 extended family members, at least in this village and the surrounding area. So that's a whole lot of handwriting to compare. And this, again, was back in the 80s. It didn't have the technology. They didn't have the ability to put it into a computer and the computer to do all the comparisons and spit out a quick little answer. It was Colonel Mustard in the, at the river with the rope. I mean, that's not how it happened back then. You had to literally manually do everything. And so that slowed up the process. There were three main families. You got the Villemins, the Jacobs, and then you also have the Laroche. And they all tie in together in this big old long spider web, and they show it in the Netflix series. It really, all the little extra, it doesn't help you to understand it any better by having all the little faces and the little webs. You pretty much are going to focus on the grandparents, Jean-Marie and Christine, Gregory, and then the brother, his brother and his wife, and another cousin that was raised, like a brother. That's what you find out, that this Laroche guy that ends up entering the scene, now I'm going to introduce him, he was raised with Jean-Marie and Michel for a good portion of his life. So he's almost like a brother. He's really not like a cousin. So that's how this Laroche guy gets fingered into this whole story. The locals, they were mostly unhelpful to everybody, especially the media, but even to the police. And the police just found them to be clannish. That they just said it. They're clannish. Even though I've mentioned that almost everybody involved in this is blue collar, I hate to say it, but there's no level of no low bar to the level of petty. I mean, that people get killed on the street for $5 or for something very petty, and just simply a simple promotion with a few more assets would be enough. Or the way the person was bragging about it was enough within a family perhaps to set off this horrible chain of events. And I mean, it's a chain of events. It doesn't stop with the murder of little Gregory, sadly. So Gregory is laid to rest, and the procession of Gregory's funeral is totally captured. So you can watch the videos today. You can watch you can see the photographs and time lapse of Gregory being laid into the ground, and his mother Christine faints dead away and is carried away, and I believe her mother faints as well and is carried away, and the photogs are snap, 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 and they're not giving this family one bit of a break. So the police, they go into investigation mode, and a cousin named Bernard Laroche, again, this is the cousin that was raised like a brother, his wife Marie Ange, again, another Marie, so it gets we could just call her Ange. She goes to a phone booth in the village and phones in an anonymous tip to the police. This is what gets him on the radar, strangely enough, other than the father saying the word Laroche. Marie-Ange, his wife, goes into the town, goes to the phone booth, makes an anonymous call, fingering some random branch of the family, the Ollards. And I think they were elderly on top of it, or older, not young, not John Marie and Christine's age. So they somehow convince Marie-Ange, to come into the police station, which she does. And this starts the ball rolling towards Laroche. But they bring the Ollards in, they question them from tip to tail. They say, not the ones, these people didn't have anything to do with it. They let him go. But then you start to wonder, what was Marie-Ange's reason for this subterfuge? Why'd she do this? What's going on? Was it because maybe her husband was involved and she was involved and she wanted to try to throw the scent onto another branch of the family? Who knows? The police obtain a sketch allegedly by two witnesses of a man, and the man has got, like dark brown hair. Hello, you know what? They almost every single one of this whole entire family has dark brown hair and brown eyes, except for another character that I'm going to bring up. But it's so funny. It's like they all look alike, but yeah, they all look very similar. But the sketch that the witness depicts a dark-haired man with almost like a mutton chop and a bushy mustache, and looks just like Laroche. Imagine that. One of the witnesses was an owner of the coffee shop and had this sketch that looks just like Laroche drawn. Meanwhile, Jean Ker from Paris Match, he comes on the scene, and he acorns. He gets, everybody's giving everybody tips. That's how it works, with the crime and people on the ground. They're getting tips from their headquarters. They're getting tips from other people, from family members. They're getting tips from other photographers, other agencies. And he gets a tip that there's this bird brain, batty old aunt, whose name Louisette. And so he goes, and more than likely he's going to get her to talk. So he goes to her house. Her name is Louisette Jacob. He goes to her house, to this dotty, sweet old bird, and gets her talking, and she wants to, it's like early in the morning, and she wants to drink wine, and he's like, fine, anything to get you to talk, basically. So he's got his microphone running, and they end up drinking champagne, and she tells him all about the family, and she actually, as dotty as she allegedly was, gives a whole bunch of information to Jean Ker. Midway through his interview, or whatever you want to call it, his chit-chat with Louisette, out comes Laroche in his tidy whities and a wife beater or whatever, hair all askew. He's been sleeping at his aunt's house, and Jean Ker is kind of questions that, and Louisette tells Jean Ker that Laroche was scared, and she doesn't specify, but later on we find out why Laroche is at her house and is all scared. Meanwhile, he has his own wife and his own house and his own son, but he's over at Aunt Louisette's house spending the night, and you're like, that's kind of odd. So Jean Ker gets a tip, and I think he does tell the Seismat, Etienne, the police gendarme. I think he drops the information in his ear about, this Laroche guy. So maybe it was the second time that Seismat perhaps heard Laroche. And then it was okay, let's interview this Laroche guy, because this is this is not adding up. Meanwhile, let me backtrack. When Jean Ker's at Louisette's house and they're drinking and Laroche comes out, he shows him the sketch of the suspect that's been drawn that looks just like him. And so Laroche is going like this. Jean Ker's handed him this police sketch, and he's going like this and making fun of it. It's funny to him. Is this the suspect? Turning it around. And so Jean Ker gets a case of the irritation and says, this is a dead child that we're talking about here. This is a serious matter. And then Laroche jumps bad on Jean Ker and says this. I just want to make sure I get it correctly. They played me like a fool. They paid for what they did. And this is about Michel Villemin. And he complains that Jean-Michel and I guess Christine and them treated him like an outcast. So, that's why good old Jean Ker goes and drops this in the information, turns in this information to say, you maybe should look into this Laroche guy. And let me take a little break, because I think my battery might be dying, so...